There are apologies we rehearse for years and never deliver, not because we're afraid of the answer, but because we're afraid of telling the truth without protection. This is the moment after that fear. What Remains Unsaid by 10 Chapters Audiobooks. Chapter 1. Before the Camera is On. He arrived early, not because he was nervous, but because he'd learned the difference between waiting and rushing. Waiting meant you noticed things. Rushing meant you missed what mattered. The cafe was almost empty, mid-morning quiet, the kind that felt borrowed. He chose a table near the window, set his bag down, and took out the notebook he carried everywhere now. He didn't open it. He rarely did at first. The notebook was less for writing than for grounding, a physical reminder that he could pause before speaking. 10 years ago, he wouldn't have trusted himself with silence. He ordered coffee, black, and watched the street. People passed with the unself-conscious urgency of those certain they were heading somewhere important. He envied that sometimes. Not the certainty, he'd learned to distrust certainty, but the ease of not carrying invisible weight. He checked his watch once. She was still early, too. When she came in, he knew it was her before she reached the counter. She had that particular way of entering a space without claiming it, aware of where she was, who was already there. No crew followed her, no equipment announced itself. Just a canvas bag over one shoulder, hair pulled back like she didn't want it to distract her. She spotted him, hesitated a fraction of a second, then crossed the room. "Daniel?" she asked. He stood. "Yes, you must be..." "Clara." She shook his hand once, firmly. No linger, no assessment disguised as warmth. "Thanks for meeting early." "Thanks for coming alone," he said, before he could think better of it. She smiled, quick and unoffended. That was the idea. They sat. She ordered tea. He noticed she waited until the server left before speaking again. "I want to be clear about my role," she said. "Not rehearsed, practiced. The foundation asked me to document process, not outcomes. This isn't a profile, and it's not promotional." He nodded. "Who decides what stays in?" She didn't blink. "You do, and the people you meet." The answer settled something in his chest he hadn't realized was still tight. They talked logistics first, route, timing, where she'd need space and where she wouldn't. She explained that this journey was part of a larger initiative, different stories handled by different people, but that this one would be kept small, intentional, quiet. They thought one person would make it easier to forget the camera, she said. "I don't want to forget it. I just don't want it to lead." "That's usually when it works best," she said. He took a breath, then said the thing he'd been circling since the email arrived weeks ago. "I've spoken publicly before. Panels, meetings, even a few talks." He paused. "I don't want to do that again unless I stop protecting myself." She didn't rush to fill the silence. She'd learned that too. "What does that look like?" she asked. "It looks like not skipping names, not shaping the story so it lands clean." She nodded once. "And what are the boundaries?" He'd rehearsed this part. Still, his voice went quieter. "No filming the apologies themselves, not unless everyone involved explicitly asks for it. Some people won't want a camera anywhere near them. That matters more than the project." "Agreed," she said immediately. No negotiation. "I wouldn't have accepted the assignment otherwise." That was the moment he trusted her, not because she said the right thing, but because she hadn't needed convincing. They finished their drinks. Outside, a delivery truck idled, then pulled away. The morning moved forward whether they were ready or not. As they stood, she gestured toward the door. "Do you want the camera on for the drive?" He considered it. The road, the miles ahead, the faces he hadn't seen in years. "Not yet," he said. She adjusted the strap of her bag. "That's fine." They walked out together, neither in front of the other. In the parking lot, she opened the trunk and set her bag inside beside his. 2 bags, no excess. As they pulled onto the highway, the radio stayed off. He rested his hand on the notebook in his lap, feeling the familiar weight of it, the promise and the cost. Nothing had happened yet, but the part he'd been avoiding, the part he hadn't written or said or shown anyone, had finally agreed to come with him. And this time, he wasn't turning away. Chapter 2: The Weight of Names. The highway widened into a long, pale ribbon, and for a while the world felt reduced to what Daniel could see through the windshield: winter bare trees, low clouds, exit signs that promised towns he'd once used as hiding places. Clara drove first, not because he asked, but because she did it the way people did when they understood silence, without making a ceremony of it. He sat in the passenger seat with his notebook on his lap, thumb resting along the edge. Every few miles, he caught himself checking the side mirror, as if he might see the past keeping pace beside them. "You can tell me if you want me to stop anywhere. Coffee, air, whatever." He almost laughed at the simplicity of it. Air, as if it were a choice he could make. "I'm fine." She didn't respond with encouragement. She just nodded, like fine was a statement, not a challenge. After 30 minutes, she reached over and turned the radio on low. Static first, then a soft indie station. The sound filled the car without demanding anything. Daniel let his shoulders drop a fraction. "You said you don't want the camera to lead," she said, casual, as if they were talking about weather. "What do you want it to do instead?" He stared out at a field of frozen grass. Maybe follow, maybe, or witness. He hesitated, but not interpret. Clara's fingers tightened briefly on the steering wheel, then relaxed. "That's usually where it gets messy," she said. "People want a meaning, a moral." "And you don't?" He kept his tone neutral. "I want truth," she said, "but truth isn't always satisfying." That landed somewhere deep in him, an old familiar bruise that no longer hurt all the time, just when pressed. They drove in quiet stretches after that. He let his mind drift, not to memories exactly, but to the feeling of them, the old heat of shame, the sharpness of wanting something too badly, the ways he used to make everything smaller than it was, especially the harm. 10 years sober, and still, names. He'd spoken in rooms full of people and told them his story with the practiced clarity of someone who knew how to keep the edges smooth. He said, "People I hurt, things I did, mistakes." He said, "I take responsibility." He said, "I made amends." And he believed it, mostly. But lately, when he sat down to write, his hand had hovered over the page as if the words were heavier than ink could hold. When he tried to describe what he'd done, he could feel the story bending toward mercy. Not mercy for others, mercy for himself. He opened the notebook now, finally, the paper crisp under his thumb. A list filled the first page, written in neat block letters, as if handwriting could control what the names meant. Mara, Elliot, Mr. Jensen, Tanya, Luis. The words sat there, innocent and brutal. Clara glanced at him, quick and polite, then back to the road. "Is that your list?" He looked at her. "Yes. You don't have to show me." "I'm not." He closed the notebook halfway. "It's just, I keep thinking I've already done this, and then I realize I've done it in a way that lets me stay comfortable. That's honest, she said. It's late, he replied, and the bitterness surprised him. He hadn't meant to say it like that. Clara didn't flinch. Late is better than never, she said, but also, late doesn't erase the fact that it's late. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost whispering. Exactly. They passed a sign for a small town. Clara slowed, signaling towards an exit that led to a cluster of fast food logos and a gas station. Do you need anything? She asked. He stared at the exit as if it were a decision about his whole life. No, Clara took it anyway. The car rolled off the highway and into a parking lot. She shut the engine off. The sudden quiet felt like someone had removed a layer of skin. We're stopping, she said, calm, not asking permission, because your foot has been tapping for 20 minutes. Daniel blinked. He hadn't realized it. His leg was bouncing like a reflex he didn't own. He forced it still. Sorry. Don't be. She turned slightly in her seat, not facing him fully, giving him space. Do you want to talk about the first one? The first one. He swallowed. The name that rose was the one he'd tried not to let rise on paper, the one that made the rest of the list feel like an excuse. Mara, he said, and the air changed the moment he spoke it, like the car itself recognized it. Clara didn't nod, didn't offer sympathy, she just waited. Daniel stared at the dashboard. She was my friend, he said, hating the softness of the word. Before everything, before I got bad. He paused, corrected himself because the correction mattered. Before I chose it over her. Clara's voice stayed level. Does she know you're coming? I sent a letter, not an apology letter, a request. He swallowed again. I told her she could ignore it. I told her she didn't owe me an answer. And? Clara asked gently. She said I could meet her, he said, and his hands tightened on the notebook. 15 minutes, in public, no explanations. Clara's gaze flicked to the notebook. That sounds like a boundary. It is, he said, and she's earned the right to set it. Clara nodded once, almost imperceptible. Do you know what you're going to say? Daniel looked down at the list again, at how simple the names were, how impossible. I know what I'm not going to say, he answered. I'm not going to tell her how hard it was for me. I'm not going to ask her to reassure me. I'm not going to make it a story. Clara's expression softened, just slightly. Good, she said. That means you're ready to carry it. He stared at her. Carry what? The weight of the name, Clara said, without trying to lighten it. Outside, a man walked past their car with a paper cup and an impatient stride, living his ordinary day. Daniel watched him disappear into the convenience store and felt, for the first time that morning, the full truth of what he'd agreed to do. Not confession, not performance, not redemption, just the steady, sober act of saying a name out loud and letting it mean what it meant. Clara reached for the keys, but didn't start the engine yet. When we get Ack on the highway, she said, tell me where you want me to be when you meet her. Daniel blinked. What? In the cafe? Outside? Around the corner, Clara said. I'm not filming the meeting, but I can be close enough that you don't feel alone walking in. Something in his throat tightened. He couldn't remember the last time someone offered him that kind of presence without trying to own it. Outside, he said, voice low. Just outside. Clara nodded and finally turned the key. The engine started. The car became motion again. And Daniel held the notebook open, letting the names sit there, heavy and true, as the road carried them toward the first one. Chapter 3. What Isn't Recorded. They reached the town just before noon. It was smaller than Daniel remembered. One main street, a few side roads that curved away as if they'd changed their minds about going somewhere else. The cafe Mara had chosen sat between a pharmacy and a dry cleaner, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Clara parked half a block away, far enough that no one would connect them, close enough that he wouldn't have to cross the street alone. She turned the engine off and rested her hands in her lap. "I'll stay here," she said. "If you want me closer, text. If you want me gone, same." He nodded. He'd expected to feel relief at being released from the car, from the witness, from the weight of being seen. Instead, he felt exposed, like the silence between them had been holding something steady. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For knowing not to ask anything else." She gave a small, almost smile. "That's part of the job." He stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, letting the cold bite his face. He could see his reflection in the cafe window as he approached, older than the last time Mara had seen him, but clearer somehow, less frantic, less hidden. Inside, the cafe smelled like burnt coffee and sugar. Mara was already there, sitting near the back, her coat still on, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked up when he approached, her expression neutral, unreadable. "Hi," he said, stopping a step away from the table. "Hi," she replied. Her voice was steady. "You've got 15 minutes. He sat. He didn't ask how she'd been. He didn't apologize yet. He took a breath and said the thing he'd practiced not practicing. "I'm not here to explain," he said, "or to make anything easier. I just wanted to say your name to you and take responsibility for what I did." Mara's eyes flickered, just once. "Go on." "I lied to you," he said, "more than once. I took money I told you I'd pay back. I used you as cover when I didn't want people to see what was happening. And when you tried to stop me, I blamed you for caring." The words landed between them, heavy and specific. He didn't soften them, he didn't justify them. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued, "and I don't expect this to change anything. I just needed to say it without asking for anything in return." Mara stared at him for a long moment. When she spoke, it wasn't with anger. That almost made it worse. "I already forgave myself for staying as long as I did." Daniel nodded. He'd wondered if she might say something like that. He'd hoped she wouldn't. "That doesn't erase what I did," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." They sat in silence. He felt the clock ticking inside his chest, not as pressure, but as fact. 15 minutes. A boundary. A gift. "I don't want to be part of your story," said Mara finally. "Whatever you're doing now." "I won't include you," he said immediately. "I promise." She studied his face, as if looking for the reflexive defensiveness that used to live there. Whatever she saw, it seemed to satisfy her. "Good," she said, standing. "Then we're done." He stood too. "Thank you for meeting me." Mara paused, hand on the back of her chair. "For what it's worth," she said, not looking at him, "you look present." He swallowed. "I'm trying to be." She nodded once and walked out. Daniel stayed where he was until the bell over the door rang again. Only then did he let himself sit back down, the full weight of the encounter settling into his bones. It wasn't relief he felt. It was something steadier, something that didn't ask for applause. Outside, Clara waited. He found her leaning against the car, camera still zipped away in her bag, gaze unfocused in the way of someone deliberately not watching. When she saw him, she straightened slightly, reading his face without interrogating it. "Do you want to sit for a minute?" she asked. "Yes," he said. His voice surprised him by holding. They sat on the curb, side by side, not touching. Traffic passed. Somewhere down the street, someone laughed. "I didn't record anything," Clara said quietly. "I didn't even take notes." "I know," Daniel replied. She waited. "She forgave herself before I ever showed up," he said after a moment. Clara nodded. "That happens. It doesn't mean you don't get to decide the ending." He exhaled, slow and deliberate. For years, he'd wanted an ending, clean, redemptive, shaped like closure. What he felt now was different, unfinished, honest. They got back in the car. This time, when Clara asked about the camera, he shook his head again. "Not today," he said. She didn't argue. The engine started. The road opened. As they pulled back onto the highway, Daniel opened his notebook and drew a small line through Mara's name, not crossing it out, not erasing it, just marking that it had been spoken, fully and without disguise. What wasn't recorded still mattered. Maybe it mattered most of all. Chapter 4. The Apology That Waited. The motel was quieter than he expected. 2 stories, a flickering vacancy sign, the kind of place that smelled faintly of detergent and old heat. Daniel stood outside his room for a moment after unlocking the door, as if crossing the threshold required a different kind of readiness than walking into the cafe had. Inside, the room was clean in a way that felt temporary. Bedspread tucked too tight, a single chair by the window, no personality to disturb. He set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. For a long time, he didn't move. The apology to Mara had been heavy, but it hadn't surprised him. He'd known the shape of it for years, even if he'd avoided the weight. This next one was different. It had been waiting longer, quietly, patiently, like something that knew it couldn't be rushed without being diminished. He took out the notebook again and flipped to the page he'd avoided writing on. Elliot. The name sat alone, underlined twice, as if he'd tried to convince himself it mattered less by isolating it. Elliot hadn't been a victim in the way Mara had been. That was the problem. Elliot had been a partner, an accomplice, someone who'd followed Daniel into the dark because Daniel had made it look survivable. Daniel lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The motel's light fixture buzzed softly, uneven, like it might give up at any moment. He remembered Elliot laughing once, years ago, saying, "We'll be fine. You always figure it out." Daniel had believed him, or maybe he'd believed himself. A knock sounded at the door, not urgent, not hesitant, just there. He sat up and opened it to find Clara standing in the hallway, hands tucked into her jacket. "I'm not here to check on you," she said before he could ask. "Just wanted to make sure you knew dinner's in an hour, with or without me." He appreciated that she'd framed it as an option. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I'll keep the camera off tonight." He nodded. "I wasn't worried you wouldn't." That earned him a small smile. She turned to go, then paused. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he confirmed. After she left, Daniel sat back down, the room closing in just enough to make thinking unavoidable. Elliot had disappeared before Daniel got sober, not vanished, just gone, moved cities, changed numbers, left behind debts Daniel had helped create. For years, Daniel had told himself there was no point in looking him up. Too late, too intrusive, too uncertain. The truth was simpler. Daniel hadn't wanted to say the apology without knowing how it would land. He found Elliot's address folded into the back of the notebook, creased from being handled too many times. A suburb 2 hours east. a public place suggested in the email Elliot had finally replied to after months of silence. I can meet. I don't want to talk about the past. I want to talk about now. Daniel had read that line over and over, unsure whether it was mercy or warning. He closed the notebook and lay back again, one hand resting over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm there. He reminded himself of what this apology was not meant to do. It wasn't meant to undo the choices they'd made together. It wasn't meant to restore the version of them that had once believed recklessness was loyalty. It was meant to stop the waiting. When he finally stood, it was to shower, to eat something simple, to let the day end without ceremony. In the small dining room, Clara sat at a corner table with a bowl of soup and a notebook of her own open beside her. She looked up when he entered, then back down, letting him choose. He took the seat across from her. They ate quietly for a few minutes, the clink of spoons the only punctuation. "This one feels different," she said eventually, not a question. "Yes," he replied. "Do you want to tell me why?" He considered it. He'd learned the difference between privacy and evasion. This wasn't the latter. "Because I waited. Not out of respect, out of fear." Clara nodded, as if that answer fit something she already knew. Fear of what? Of finding out whether the apology was still mine to make, or if I'd waited so long it belonged to someone else's healing. "That's a real risk," she said gently. "I know." They finished eating. Outside, night pressed against the windows, the vacancy sign buzzing its insistence into the dark. Back in his room, Daniel sat at the small desk and opened the notebook one last time before sleep. He wrote Elliot's name again, this time beneath the first, and added a single sentence. "I'm here now." It wasn't poetic, it wasn't complete, but it was honest. The apology had waited long enough. Chapter 5. Silence as Proof. Morning came without ceremony. Pale light through thin curtains, the quiet hum of the motel waking up one door at a time. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and listened to it, noticing how his body felt before his thoughts caught up. Steady, a little tight around the ribs, but grounded. He hadn't slept much, not from fear exactly, from the kind of alertness that came when something important waited ahead. Downstairs, Clara was already outside, leaning against the car with a paper cup in her hand. She lifted it slightly in greeting when she saw him, then took a step back, giving him room to unlock his door and load his bag. The camera stayed in the trunk. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." They pulled onto the road with the windows cracked, cold air cutting through the warmth of the car. The town fell away behind them, replaced by long stretches of highway and fields that looked like they were holding their breath. For a while, neither of them spoke. Daniel felt the urge to fill the silence rise and pass, like an old habit he no longer needed. He watched the road unspool and thought about Elliot. Not the memories, not yet, but the fact of him. Alive somewhere, willing to meet, unwilling to revisit the past. "I might not say much afterward," he said finally. Clara glanced and then back at the road. "That's fine." "I don't mean right away. I mean at all." She nodded. "Silence can be data." He smiled faintly. "You say that like it's something you learned." "I say it like it's something I trust," she replied. They exited onto a smaller road lined with bare trees and modest houses set back from the street. The cafe Elliot had chosen was part of a strip mall. No atmosphere, no history to lean on, just a place where people came and went without lingering. Clara parked at the far end. She didn't ask where she wanted her. She waited.
Inside this time, near the counter, if that's okay. Of course. She followed him in, stopping at the counter to order a tea while he scanned the room. Elliot sat alone near the window, hands folded on the table, posture upright in a way that suggested effort. He looked older than Daniel remembered. Not worse, just altered by time. Daniel approached and stopped. "Elliot," he said. Elliot looked up. His expression didn't change. "Daniel." Daniel sat. He didn't open with an apology. He let the space between them exist. "I appreciate you meeting me," he said. "I know you didn't want to talk about the past." "I didn't say that," Elliot replied. "I said I didn't want excuses." Daniel nodded. "You won't get any." Elliot studied him, eyes sharp, assessing. "Why now?" Daniel took a breath. This was the question he'd waited 10 years to answer without flinching. "Because I'm done telling the story without you in it," he said, "and because I don't want to carry what I owe you into the rest of my life." Elliot leaned back, considering. "You owe me money," he said, flat, factual. Daniel reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. "I know." Elliot didn't touch it. "You owe me more than that," Elliot continued. "You talked me into things I wouldn't have done alone." "Yes," Daniel said, "I did." No qualifiers, no shared blame. Elliot's jaw tightened. "You left." "Yes." Silence stretched. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything Daniel wasn't trying to smooth over. "I got out," Elliot said finally, "on my own." "I'm glad. I didn't help you do that." "I know." Elliot exhaled slowly. "So what do you want?" Daniel met his gaze. "Nothing. I wanted you to hear me say it, and I wanted to give you the choice of what happens next." Elliot looked at the envelope then, picked it up, weighed it in his hand. He didn't open it. "I don't forgive you," he said. Daniel nodded. "I understand." "And I don't want a relationship," Elliot added. "I wasn't expecting one." Another pause. Then Elliot slid the envelope into his bag. "This helps," he said. "The money, the clarity." Daniel felt something loosen. Not relief exactly, but release. The kind that came from not reaching for more. They stood. Elliot hesitated, then extended his hand. Daniel took it. "Take care of yourself," Elliot said. "I will," Daniel replied. "You too." Elliot left without looking back. Daniel stayed at the table for a moment, hands resting flat, feeling the absence of urgency. When he stood and turned, Clara was at the counter, her tea untouched, eyes deliberately on the window. She didn't ask. Outside, the sky had cleared. The air felt sharper, cleaner. In the car, they sat with the doors open, letting the cold wake them both up. "You don't have to say anything," Clara said. "I know," Daniel replied. They drove for miles without speaking. He watched the fields pass, the names in his notebook shifting in weight, not lighter, but truer. Silence wasn't avoidance anymore. It was proof. Chapter 6. When Forgiveness Isn't Offered. They didn't drive far before stopping. Not because either of them said anything, but because the road narrowed into a stretch that asked for slowness. One lane each way, trees crowding close enough to feel intentional. Clara pulled into a turnout overlooking a river swollen with early spring runoff. She shut the engine off and leaned back in her seat, eyes on the water below. "You did what you came to do," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "I did part of it." "That counts." He looked at her then, really looked, and noticed something he hadn't allowed himself to before. The fine lines at the corner of her eyes that came from focus, not age. The way she held herself, contained but not closed, as if she was used to standing near other people's truths without flinching. He looked away first. I keep thinking about what he said, not forgiving me. I don't blame him, but I didn't expect how final it would feel. Clara turned toward him. Their shoulders brushed, barely, unmistakably. The contact sent a brief, surprising warmth through him, like a current finding a path. She didn't move away. Final doesn't mean wrong. It means honest. Daniel swallowed. He'd heard versions of that sentence before. None of them had landed like this. A gust of wind rattled the bare branches. Clara reached for the blanket in the back seat and draped it loosely over her legs. When she passed the end of it toward him, her fingers grazed his hand. The touch lingered half a second too long to be accidental. Neither of them commented. He pulled the blanket up, the shared fabric creating a small, charged closeness. He could feel the warmth of her through it, subtle but unmistakable. He shifted slightly, aware of how aware he was. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm trying not to turn this into something it isn't," he replied, honestly. Her mouth curved, just faintly. "And what do you think it might be?" He hesitated. The old version of him would have joked, deflected. He stayed still instead. "Something I don't want to rush," he said. Clara studied his face, as if checking the truth of it. "That's new for you?" "Yes." They sat like that for a while, watching the river move fast and uncontained below them. Daniel felt the pull of wanting, to reach for her hand, to close the small distance between their shoulders. The wanting surprised him more than the attraction itself. Desire had always felt dangerous, tangled up with need and escape. This felt clear. Clara shifted, the blanket sliding. Their knees touched. This time, neither of them moved away. "You know," she said, eyes still on the water, "people think forgiveness is the point of these stories." "And it isn't?" he asked. "I think the point is learning to live without it," she said, "without becoming bitter or small." He turned to her, drawn despite himself. "You sound like you've practiced that." She glanced at him, something unguarded passing across her face. "I have." He wanted to ask more. He didn't. Respect had become its own kind of intimacy. They drove again as afternoon slipped toward evening. At a roadside diner, they shared a booth, knees close beneath the table. He noticed the way she tucked her foot against the metal rung, the way her laughter, when it came, was quiet and surprised, as if she hadn't expected it herself. When the server dropped off the check, Daniel reached for it at the same time Clara did. Their hands collided, fingers tangling briefly. The jolt was unmistakable, a sharp, alive sensation that traveled up his arm and settled somewhere deep and warm. "Sorry," she said, though she didn't sound like she meant it. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "It's okay." Outside, dusk pressed close. As they walked back to the car, their shoulders brushed again, easier now, less accidental. Clara unlocked the door, then paused, hand resting on the handle. "We should talk about boundaries," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his. "Yes," he said, "we should." "Not yet," he added silently. Not before he understood what he was feeling, not before he knew he could hold it without using it as a distraction. She seemed to sense that too. They drove on, the space between them charged with things neither of them named. Desire, yes, but also something quieter and more unsettling. Hope. And Daniel realized, with a mix of wonder and caution, that wanting her didn't make him want to escape. It made him want to stay. Chapter 7.
The cost of being exact. They checked in to a different motel that night. New town, same spare anonymity. One floor this time. Doors facing the parking lot, the hum of traffic close enough to feel like company. Daniel stood outside his room longer than necessary, keys warm in his hand. Across the lot, Clara unlocked her door and set her bag inside. She paused, glanced over, then walked toward him instead of disappearing into her room. "Are you okay?" she asked. Not the careful version, the real one. "Yes," he said, then corrected himself because precision mattered now. "I'm steady." She nodded. "That's different." "It is." They walked toward the vending machines together, the air cooling quickly as night settled. The machine whirred and clanked while Daniel waited for a bottle of water to drop. When it did, Clara reached down at the same time he did, their hands brushing again. Less surprising this time, more deliberate in how neither pulled away. Her fingers were warm. He noticed that immediately, and the noticing felt intimate. They straightened. For a moment, they stood close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something clean and faintly citrus, nothing sweet. He wondered briefly what it would feel like to lean in. The thought startled him with its clarity. Clara broke the moment first, not stepping back, just shifting her weight. "Tomorrow," she said. "You're meeting Tanya?" "Yes." "She hasn't replied to your last message." "No." Clara studied his face. "And you're still going?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "That's the cost," she said, quietly. He met her eyes. "Of being exact." Back in his room, Daniel sat on the bed and opened his notebook. The names were fewer now, but the space between them felt heavier. He stopped at Tanya, written smaller than the others, as if he'd hoped she might stay that way. Tanya hadn't been someone he'd hurt directly. That was what made her apology so complicated. She'd been collateral, a roommate who'd covered for him once, a friend who'd trusted him enough to lend her car, her couch, her silence. He'd never asked her to do those things. He'd just let her. He closed the notebook without writing anything new. Tonight wasn't for rehearsal. Later, a soft knock came at his door, not tentative, not insistent. He opened it to find Clara standing there with 2 paper cups. "Tea," she said. "Chamomile. No expectations attached." He stepped aside. She came in, hesitating just long enough to let him decide whether to close the door. He did. They sat on opposite ends of the bed at first, the space between them deliberate, respectful. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. "You don't have to let me in on this part. I know that." "I want to," he replied. Then, after a pause, "But I don't want it to turn into something else." She looked at him, understanding sharp in her gaze. "You mean you don't want comfort to become avoidance?" "Yes." "That's very you," she said softly. Not teasing, observant. They drank their tea. The distance between them shrank without either of them choosing it. When she shifted, her knee touched his thigh. This time, the contact sent a slow, deliberate warmth through him, not a jolt, something deeper, more dangerous. He didn't move away. Neither did she. "I'm attracted to you," Daniel said, suddenly, the words precise and unembellished. Saying them felt like stepping into cold water, bracing, honest. Clara's breath caught, just slightly. "I know." He looked at her, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," she said, "and I'm not afraid of it." Something in his chest tightened. "I am." She turned toward him fully now. "Because you don't trust it?" "Because I do," he said, "and I don't want to use it to soften the hard parts of this."
Clara considered him, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out, not to his hand, but to the notebook on the bedside table. She touched it lightly, then looked back at him. "Then don't," she said. "Let it be something that waits." The word landed between them like a promise neither of them was ready to make out loud. She stood first, setting her empty cup down. At the door, she paused. "Tomorrow might not go the way you want." "I know," he said. She nodded. "I'll be there anyway." After she left, Daniel lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, heart steady, mind clear in a way that surprised him. Desire hummed through him, unresolved, alive, but it didn't pull him away from himself. It asked to be exact, and for the first time in a long while, he trusted himself to be. Chapter 8. After the last door closes. The building Tanya worked in was quieter than Daniel expected, a low-rise office complex with glass doors and muted signs, the kind of place designed to disappear into routine. They arrived early. Too early. Clara parked across the street and cut the engine, leaving the car idling in the stillness. "She hasn't confirmed," Clara said gently. "I know." They sat there for a moment, watching people come and go, coffee cups, backpacks, the choreography of ordinary mornings. Daniel felt oddly calm, not numb, ready. "I'll wait here," Clara said, "unless you want me closer." He looked at her, at the familiar steadiness in her expression. "Here is good." She nodded, then reached into the back seat and handed him the notebook. "You forgot this." Their fingers brushed as he took it. This time, the contact didn't spark, it grounded. He closed his hand around the notebook and felt something settle into place. "Thank you," he said. "For the notebook. For everything else." He crossed the street alone. Inside, the receptionist glanced up. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Tanya Morales," he said. Saying her full name felt right, exact. The receptionist checked the screen, frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, she stepped out. She asked me to let you know she won't be able to meet today." The words landed cleanly. No sting, no collapse. "Did she say when?" he asked. "She said not to reschedule." Daniel nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." He turned and walked out before the receptionist could soften it, before anyone could offer him a version of comfort that would dilute the truth. Outside, the door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Clara looked up immediately. She didn't ask. She watched his face as he crossed back toward the car, reading the outcome without demanding the story. "She didn't come," he said when he reached her. "I'm sorry." Not reflexively, precisely. Daniel leaned back against the car and let the cool metal press into his spine. He opened the notebook, flipped to Tanya's name, and looked at it for a long moment. "What do you do when someone doesn't want to hear it?" he asked quietly. Clara considered. "You respect it, and you tell the truth anyway, just not to them." He nodded. "That feels incomplete." "It is, but incomplete doesn't mean unfinished." He closed the notebook and exhaled. For years, he'd believed amends were something you delivered, something received. He was learning, slowly, that sometimes they were something you carried, without witnesses, without resolution. They drove in silence for a while, the road bending toward late afternoon. Eventually, Daniel reached for the radio and turned it on low. Music filled the space between them, soft enough to sit alongside thought. At a rest stop overlooking a stretch of water, they got out and stood by the railing. The wind was stronger here, tugging at Clara's jacket, lifting strands of her hair loose from its tie. Without thinking, Daniel reached out and tucked one back behind her ear. As soon as his fingers touched her skin, warmth flared, quiet but unmistakable. He froze. "I'm sorry, She turned toward him, close enough now that he could see the change in her breathing. "Don't apologize. Just don't disappear." "I won't," he said, and realized he meant it in more than one way. They stood there, not touching again, but not stepping back either. The wanting was still there, clearer now, less charged with fear. Desire without urgency, longing without demand. Back in the car, as evening edged closer, Clara drove. Daniel watched the road pass and felt the shape of the journey shifting. Fewer stops ahead, fewer names. Not because the past was gone, but because he had finally stopped avoiding the places where it didn't offer him anything in return. When they reached the motel that night, the sky was streaked with pink and gray. Clara parked and sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel. "After today," she said, "the project changes." He looked at her. "How?" "There's less to capture," she said, "more to trust." Daniel nodded. "I don't know what comes next." She met his gaze, something open and warm in her expression. "Neither do I, but I'm still here." That mattered more than anything else. Later, alone in his room, Daniel opened the notebook one last time that day. He didn't cross Tanya's name out. He didn't underline it. He wrote beneath it, careful and exact. "I came, I listened, I respected the door when it closed." He closed the notebook and lay back on the bed, the weight of the journey lighter, not because it was finished, but because he was no longer fighting it. And somewhere across the parking lot, he knew Clara was there too, not as witness, not as project, but as someone choosing to stay close after the last door had closed. Chapter 9. What He Can Finally Say. They left early the next morning, before the motel had fully woken. The sky was pale and undecided, the kind of light that made everything feel possible and unfinished at the same time. Daniel carried the notebook with him to the car, not out of habit now, but intention. Clara noticed. She didn't comment. The road stretched ahead in long, gentle curves. It felt quieter than the days before, not because less was happening, but because less needed to be held back. "I don't think I need to go anywhere else," Daniel said after a while. Clara glanced at him. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "Not because there's nothing left, because I know what belongs to me now, and what doesn't." She nodded. "Then we turn around." The word turn felt right. Not an ending, a choice. They stopped outside a town neither of them recognized, the kind of place built for people passing through. Daniel went inside the cafe alone and ordered 2 coffees. When he came back, Clara was standing by the car, arms loosely folded, watching the road like it might say something back. He handed her a cup. Their fingers brushed. This time, neither of them pulled away. "There's something I need to say," Daniel began, then stopped. Not because he'd lost his nerve, but because he wanted the words to land clean. Clara waited. "I didn't do this to be ready for anyone. I did it because I don't want to stand in front of people and ask them to be brave while I'm still hiding parts of myself." Her gaze softened, but she didn't interrupt. "I don't know yet if I'll publish the book or speak again, but I know this." He took a breath. "I'm done shaping my story so it feels safe." "That's not an easy place to live," Clara said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but it's the only one that feels true." For a moment they stood there with the cold air pressing in around them, the wanting between them clear and unspoken. Desire sat just beneath the surface now, not sharp, not urgent, but steady, patient. Clara shifted her weight, then reached into the back seat and pulled out the camera. She didn't turn it on. She just held it, resting against her hip. "Would it be okay," she asked, carefully, "if I started now?" Daniel looked at the camera, then back at her. He felt the instinct to retreat flicker and pass. This wasn't about being seen, it was about letting someone in. "Yes," he said, "I think it should start here." She nodded once, not triumphant, not relieved, just respectful. She turned the camera on, not pointing it at him, but at the road ahead, the stretch of asphalt disappearing into light. She filmed his hands on the steering wheel when they got back in the car, the quiet, the movement. She didn't ask him to speak. Daniel didn't feel exposed, he felt accompanied. As they drove, the conversation loosened, unexpectedly light. They talked about nothing, the strange comfort of roadside diners, the way motels all smelled faintly the same, the relief of not being asked for conclusions. At one point, Clara reached over to adjust the camera angle. Her hand brushed his arm. The contact sent a warm, unmistakable current through him. He glanced at her. She met his gaze, something open and careful there. "I'm attracted to you," he said. No hesitation, no apology. "I know," she replied. Her voice was steady, but her breath wasn't. "And I don't want to rush it." "Neither do I," he said. "I don't want this to close anything that should stay open." She smiled then, not wide, not teasing, understanding. "Then let it be something we choose, not something that happens to us." They stopped for the night just before dusk, a small motel tucked behind a line of trees, the sky streaked pink and gray. They stood outside their rooms, neither quite ready to go inside. Daniel stepped closer. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand. She let him. The contact was warm and grounding, the culmination of every careful moment before it. He didn't pull her closer, he didn't rush, he just held her hand, letting the truth of it settle. "This doesn't fix anything," he said softly. She smiled. "I wouldn't trust it if it did." Later, alone in his room, Daniel opened the notebook to the last blank page. He didn't write a name this time. He wrote, "I am here. I am not asking to be forgiven. I am choosing to be known." Across the parking lot, Clara reviewed the footage briefly, not for story, not for shape, but to make sure it was intact. The road, the light, the sound of motion. She closed the camera and set it aside. Tomorrow there would be one more chapter, not of the journey, but of what came after. Chapter 10. What Remains. Morning came slowly, light slipping through the trees and into the motel room like it was careful not to disturb anything important. Daniel lay awake before it fully arrived, listening, to the quiet, to his own breathing, to the unfamiliar steadiness of wanting something without fear. He hadn't slept badly, he hadn't slept perfectly either. It was the kind of rest that followed truth, not exhaustion. When he stepped outside, the air was cool and clear. Across the parking lot, Clara's door opened almost at the same time. She paused when she saw him, something soft passing between surprise and recognition. "Morning," she said. "Morning." They stood there for a moment, neither of them rushing toward coffee or cars or schedules. The project, whatever it would become, felt finished in the way that mattered. The journey had given them what it could. "I was thinking," Clara said, walking closer, "about what you said yesterday, about being done shaping your story so it feels safe." Daniel nodded. "I've spent years doing the right things. This feels like learning how to risk the right ones." She stopped in front of him now, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "And how does love fit into that?" The question wasn't teasing, it wasn't light. It landed exactly where it needed to. Daniel exhaled slowly. I used to think love was something you earned by becoming better, or something you used to avoid feeling worse. He met her eyes. I'm realizing it might just be something you allow. Clara's gaze searched his face, not for certainty, but for openness. Whatever she saw there made her step closer still. I don't want to be a reward, she said quietly, or a proof. I know. I want you to be a choice, one I make without bargaining. Something in her expression softened completely then. She reached for him, not tentatively, not urgently, but with intention. Her hands rested against his chest, over his heart, as if she was confirming something she already believed. Daniel covered her hands with his own. The contact sent a slow, spreading warmth through him, deep and grounding. This wasn't the sharp pull of need he remembered from years ago. This was something steadier, something that asked him to stay present. He leaned in, stopping just short of her lips. "Tell me if this isn't right," he said. Clara smiled, just barely. "It is." He kissed her then, not hurried, not careful to the point of restraint, but full. A kiss that held everything they'd been circling for days: respect, attraction, patience, trust. She responded immediately, her hands sliding into his jacket, pulling him closer without taking anything from him he hadn't already offered. The world narrowed to the quiet press of bodies, the shared breath, the sense of being met rather than claimed. When they finally pulled back, their foreheads rested together, both of them smiling in that surprised, disbelieving way that came from finding something real when you weren't looking for it. "This doesn't change what you did," Clara said softly, "or what you carry." "I know," Daniel replied, "but it changes how I carry it." They stayed like that for a while, holding each other without urgency. Love didn't rush them. It waited. Later, they packed their bags and loaded the car together, movements easy now, familiar. Clara set the camera carefully in the trunk, zipped away, finished. "What happens to the footage?" Daniel asked as they pulled onto the road. "Some of it will be used," she said. "Some of it won't. That's how it should be." "And the rest?" he asked. She glanced at him, her smile warm. "The rest belongs to us." They drove with the windows down, air rushing in, the future unfolding without demand. Daniel felt lighter, not because his past had been forgiven or erased, but because it no longer stood between him and what he wanted. He reached over and took Clara's hand, lacing their fingers together easily now. For the first time in a long while, love didn't feel like something that threatened his balance. It felt like something that trusted it. And that, Daniel realized, was what remained. Not the apologies, not the record, not the story he would one day tell others. What remained was this: the courage to be seen, the strength to stay open, and the quiet, undeniable truth that love didn't fix life. It helped you face it fully, together.
End of chapter and end of story. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more romance audiobooks like this one.